The millionaire invited the black cleaning lady as a joke. She arrived like a diva and everyone was in absolute shock when they found out who she really was. The main hall of the Blackwood mansion in Beverly Hills erupted with laughter when Victoria Sterling descended the marble staircase, wearing a dress that cost more than the annual salary of most people present. But it wasn't admiration. It was cruel, mocking laughter. Look who decided to show up. Richard Blackwood whispered to his guests, raising a glass of Dom Perignon champagne. Our dear cleaning lady, Victoria, 35 years old, never imagined she'd step foot in that ballroom as a guest even if it was clearly meant as a joke. For 2 years, she had cleaned every inch of that mansion, always invisible, always silent, watching rich people treat each other with rehearsed pleasantries and treating her like she was part of the furniture. The invitation had arrived 3 days earlier, delivered with a smirk she knew all too well. Charity gala on Saturday, Richard had said, handing her a gold envelope. Dress code: maximum elegance. You surely have something suitable in your wardrobe, don't you? His friends laughed through the hallway. It was a trap of public humiliation staged for the amusement of California. High society. Richard had even invited social reporters to capture what he called an educational moment. Let's make a bet, he said to his wife Helena, while Victoria vacuumed the day before. $100,000 says she doesn't have the nerve to show up, and if she does, she'll be tonight's entertainment. Helena laughed. You're terrible, Richard. The poor thing will probably show up in something borrowed and leave in 15 minutes. But Richard didn't know 2 things about Victoria. Temps. First, she had grown up in halls like that long before she had to clean them to survive. Second, some storms don't destroy. They teach you how to dance in the rain. Victoria walked through the hall under a rain of mocking glances. Her posture was straight. Her gaze was calm. She moved like someone carrying secrets powerful enough to shake that world to its core. Every step was precise, deliberate, if choreographed long ago. My God, she really came, whispered Patricia Weston, the senator's wife. And look at that dress. Where did she get that? She probably rented it, sneered Vivian Chambers, daughter of an oil magnate. She'll be paying it off in 10 installments. What none of them knew was that Victoria hadn't borrowed or rented that dress. She had retrieved it from her past. A past Richard Blackwood would have paid anything to erase had he known it existed. Richard approached her, puffed up with arrogance, surrounded by billionaire friends. He smirked, ready to play out the scene he had orchestrated. Victoria, what a pleasant surprise. I never doubted you'd come. After all, when a person like you receives an invitation to an event like this, a person like me, Victoria's calm voice cut through the air like silk laced with steel. Go on, Richard. Finish your sentence. For a split second, Richard hesitated. Her tone was unlike anything he remembered. But arrogance returned quickly. Well, someone who doesn't usually frequent this kind of environment. You must be feeling quite ... intimidated. Victoria smiled. It wasn't nervous, it was nervously serene. People stopped laughing. Intimidated, she said softly, locking eyes with him. Richard stepped back without even realizing it. Richard, I'm feeling exactly where I've always belonged. The silence that followed was brief, but it changed the energy in the room entirely. Something in the way Victoria stood, the way she moved, the way she looked at everyone, it challenged every assumption they had made about her. I hope you enjoy the evening, Richard said, forcing a smile. I'm sure it will be educational for you. Oh, I'm sure it will be educational for all of us, Victoria replied, scanning the crowd as if memorizing every face. What the guests didn't know was that Victoria carried a secret so explosive, it would turn a night of humiliation into the most powerful lesson on prejudice Beverly Hills had ever seen. Richard was still enjoying himself. She hadn't run off. But the confidence she radiated now made him uneasy. Everyone, Richard called out, tapping his glass. I'd like to introduce our special guest tonight, Victoria, our dedicated cleaning lady. Cruel laughter echoed again. Phones flashed. Socialites snapped photos for their social media captions. Helena whispered, Don't you think you're being a little cruel? Cruel? Richard laughed. I'm giving her the opportunity of a lifetime. When else would someone like her ever get to attend an event like this? Victoria stood motionless in the center of the room. Eyes were glued to her, But instead of shame, there was a serenity about her, like someone who had endured far worse. Patricia Weston approached her group of friends, trailing behind her with fake smiles. "Victoria, darling, how long did it take you to find that dress?" "Must have been so hard to find something suitable, actually," Victoria said calmly. "This dress has a very special history. It belonged to my mother." Vivian laughed. "And where did she get it? A fancy thrift store?" Victoria's smile sharpened. "My mother wore this dress the last time she was in a ballroom like this. 20 years ago, when she was still Victoria Thames Blackwood." Silence fell like a guillotine. Conversations halted. Richard turned toward her slowly. "What did you say?" he asked. "Tang Blackwood," Victoria repeated. "Funny how some people forget their own family history when it's convenient." Richard's face turned pale. Helena gripped his arm tightly. "She's lying," Richard stammered. "She's a delusional employee trying to get attention." Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out an object that made the crowd gasp. It was a ring, not just any ring. The air in the ballroom grew tense as Victoria stepped forward, holding up a ring. It was an exquisite piece engraved with a family crest and set with a distinctive blue sapphire. "This ring," she declared, voice steady and clear, "was given to my mother by her father, Henry Blackwood. My grandfather, the same man you told your children, died without an heir." A gasp rippled through the room. Richard turned pale. "Where did you get this? How dare you steal? Steal!" Victoria let out a humorless laugh. "Richard, you can't steal something that's rightfully yours by birthright." In the corner, Patricia Weston, wide-eyed, leaned in and whispered to her friend, "My God, do you think she's telling the truth?" "Impossible," Vivian murmured, though her voice trembled. "Richard would have told us if he had a cousin." Victoria turned toward them. "Cousin? No, dear. I'm not Richard's cousin." She locked eyes with Richard and dropped the bombshell. "I'm his half-sister." The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, and confused stares swirled like a storm. Richard looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, but his voice cracked. "My father would never. You're making this up." "Henry Blackwood had an affair with my mother, Isabella," Victoria continued, relentlessly. "She was the family's piano teacher. They were together for 5 years when she found out she was pregnant with me. Your father promised to take care of us, and he didn't till the day he died." Helena's hand covered her mouth as she stared. Between the two, watching the confrontation unfold like a slow-motion train wreck, Victoria said, pointing directly at Richard, "decided it would be easier to pretend we never existed. You cut off our allowance, sold the house your father bought for my mother, and left us in absolute poverty." "I had no obligation to," Richard began. "You had no obligation to take care of your father's family," Victoria interrupted, her voice icy. "Interesting philosophy, considering you inherited 100% of a fortune that should have been divided between us." Whispers turned into stares. Some guests began to subtly back away from Richard, as if his scandal were contagious. "Prove it," Richard snapped, desperation growing. "Anyone can come up with a story and a ring." Victoria's smile turned predatory. "Oh, Richard, you really think I came here without proof?" She raised her phone and motioned toward the entrance. "They can come in now." 3 people stepped into the room, and with them, everything changed. First came Diane Morrison, the most respected investigative journalist in Beverly Hills. Then David Chen, an inheritance lawyer. But the third figure made Richard's knees buckle. "Dr. Hamilton," Helena whispered, stunned. The Blackwoods' longtime family physician stepped forward, hands trembling, voice resolute. 20 years ago," Dr. Hamilton began, "I was forced to sign a falsified death certificate. Henry Blackwood did not die of natural causes. He was slowly poisoned with arsenic over several months." The hall erupted in shock. Some screamed, others clutched pearls or gasped in disbelief. Morrison raised a hand. "Please, everyone, keep your phones away. This is an official confession being recorded for legal purposes." "You're crazy," Richard shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. "My father died of heart problems." "No," said Dr. Hamilton. "Your father discovered you'd been embezzling money from the company for years. He was preparing to change his will to include Victoria and report you to the authorities. That's when the symptoms began." Victoria stood silently, tears of vindication pooling in her eyes. After 20 long years, someone was finally telling the truth, David Chen opened his briefcase and displayed an official document. This blood sample was tested last week by an independent lab. The arsenic levels were fatal. This is all lies. Richard screamed. A conspiracy to ruin me. Diane stepped forward. Mr. Blackwood, I have transcripts of 5 conversations you had with Dr. Hamilton between 2003 and 2004. In them, you threatened his career. Victoria's voice sliced through the tension. You didn't just kill our father, Richard. You stole 20 years of my life. I didn't kill anyone, Richard shouted, pointing around the room. You're all lying. Then explain this, Victoria said. She connected her phone to the mansion's sound system. A recording played. Richard's voice filled the hall. Hamilton, you're going to keep your mouth shut about anything strange you found in the old man's blood. If you open your mouth, I guarantee you'll never work as a doctor again. And as for that woman and her bastard daughter, they'll have to fend for themselves. Silence. Even Richard's supporters turned away, horrified. Helena stared at him, eyes full of betrayal. Richard, you really did this. Victoria's composure cracked for a single moment. 20 years, she screamed, the pain erupting from her like a volcano. 20 years of cleaning my own father's blood off the hands of his killer. Then, deep breath, calm again. Letho, you want to know how I got this evidence? She asked coldly. I didn't come to work here by accident. I applied specifically for this position. I spent 2 years preparing, gaining access, collecting. Proof, Richard flailed one last time. Even if all that is true, it doesn't change anything. The inheritance was distributed years ago. David Chen finally smiled. Actually, Mr. Blackwood, in cases of murder, assets can be redistributed according to the original will. And we have Henry Blackwood's real will. Victoria stepped closer. Richard was now slumped against the wall, looking like a man about to drown. My biggest mistake, she said softly, was believing you might change. Please, Richard whispered, all arrogance gone. Helena, the children, this will destroy our family. You destroyed our family, Victoria replied. The moment you chose money over justice, Richard collapsed into an armchair utterly defeated. The man who had once ruled the room now looked like a hollow shell, imploding under the weight of truth. But it wasn't over. What Richard didn't know, what he would learn in the worst way possible, was that Victoria had been building this case for years, not just for the murder, but for every act of financial fraud, blackmail, and corruption he'd committed. And now, the world would see it all. The next 2 hours transformed the most glamorous gala in Beverly Hills into the biggest scandal California high society had ever witnessed live. Richard sat on the floor, back to the wall, watching his empire crumble. Diane connected her laptop to the mansion's projection system. One by one, the guests watched the evidence flash across a massive screen. This, she announced, is a bank transfer of $200,000 from Richard Blackwood's account to Dr. Hamilton, dated 3 days after Henry Blackwood's death. On screen, the memo read, "Silence is golden." Helena, now seated across the room, sobbed silently, 20 years of lies finally shattering. And this, Diane continued, is a recording of Mr. Blackwood talking to his accountant about how to cover up embezzlement. Richard's voice echoed. I need you to make the numbers dance. If anyone finds out I've taken $20 million over the last 5 years, I'm ruined. Blame it on market fluctuations, expansion costs, whatever. Patricia Weston whispered, horrified. My God. He stole from his own company, and through it all, Victoria stood talcum, poised, relentless, the eye of the storm, watching as every carefully collected thread wove itself into justice. Justice that had been 2 decades in the making, and she was just getting started. The man who had murdered her father, David, stood exposed before the entire crowd. Mr. Chen approached with a new folder. Mr. Blackwood, he announced, in addition to the criminal charges, I must inform you that Miss Thames is filing a $50 million civil suit against you for wrongful death and misappropriation of inheritance. $50 million. Richard looked up, eyes glazed with shock. I don't have $50 million. No, Victoria said softly, but your company is worth $120 million, and half of it has always been mine by right. Diane Morrison continued the devastating presentation. We also have evidence that Richard Blackwood blackmailed at least 5 local politicians, bribed 3 judges, and diverted charity funds to personal accounts. Gasps of horror rippled through the room. Guests who had arrived as Richard's supporters now stepped back, as if his very presence was radioactive. "Victoria," Richard pleaded, broken and trembling. "Please, you got what you wanted. Stop this." Victoria stepped forward and knelt in front of him, locking eyes with the man who had shattered her life. "Richard, you killed our father. You stole my family, my inheritance, my dignity. And then you made me clean his blood off your hands for 2 years. I can make it up to you," he whispered desperately. "There is no making up for 20 years of injustice," Victoria replied, her voice calm, yet chilling. "But there are consequences." Helena's phone rang. It was one of their children, calling from college. "Mom, ... is everything okay? They're saying online that Dad is a murderer." Helena looked at Richard, her face twisted with disgust. "Your own children are finding out what kind of monster you are from social media." Richard tried to stand, but collapsed to his knees. "Helena, please, the children know," Helena screamed, silencing the entire room. "You don't get to mention our children. You've shamed them forever." Dr. Hamilton stepped forward. "Miss Thames, I've already contacted the police. Richard will be arrested later today for murder. Murder, fraud, blackmail, tax evasion," Victoria clarified. "He will spend the rest of his life in prison." She turned to face the guests, all eyes now on Herzim, admiring, others fearful. "I want everyone to understand one thing. I didn't do this for revenge. I did this for justice for all the people trampled on by men like Richard Blackwood." Patricia Weston approached hesitantly. "Victoria, ... we're so sorry. We didn't know." "You knew," Victoria replied firmly. "You saw how I was treated like subhuman. You laughed. You participated. The only difference now is, you know I have more money than you." Sirens echoed outside as police vehicles pulled up. The sound was a final punctuation mark. Richard looked at Victoria one last time. "You've destroyed my life," he whispered. "No," Victoria said, standing tall. "You destroyed your own life the moment you chose evil. I just made sure the truth came out." As police officers entered and handcuffed Richard, walking him past the very guests he had once tried to impress, Victoria stepped onto the balcony. Below, dozens of reporters, photographers, and TV cameras waited. The story had already gone viral. Helena joined her on the balcony, her voice small and sincere. "Victoria, I really didn't know. I swear." "I know," Victoria said gently. "You were also his victim. What happens now?" Victoria looked out over the sparkling city. "Now, Helena, justice will finally be served. And maybe Beverly Hills will learn that class has nothing to do with a bank account." As Richard was led away in handcuffs, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years' peace. What Richard didn't know yet was that she had not only planned every detail of his downfall, but also every step of her own rise. The Blackwood empire had a new heir one who would protect the very people Richard once exploited. 6 months later, Victoria Thames Blackwood sat in Richard's former office, now completely renovated. The walls that once boasted trophies of arrogance now displayed certificates from social programs and framed photos of employees who had risen from entry-level positions to executive roles. Richard had been sentenced to 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole. The charges included murder, corporate fraud, blackmail, and tax evasion. His personal fortune had been confiscated to compensate his many victims. Victoria was only one of many. "Miss Thames Blackwood," said Amanda, her new executive assistant, once a cleaner in the same building. "Forbes magazine is here for the interview about the company's transformation." Victoria smiled. Just 6 months, she had increased profits by 40% simply by treating employees like human beings. Fair wages, merit-based promotions, and a respectful work environment had created a thriving company. Richard could never have imagined under his toxic leadership Helena had filed for divorce immediately and moved out of state with the children. Before leaving, she met with Victoria. "You could have destroyed us completely," she said, "but you protected my children. I'll never forget your generosity." "Children don't pay for their parents' sins," Victoria replied. "They deserve the chance to become better people than he was." Dr. Hamilton, now a medical consultant for the company, offered free health care to employees. "I never thought I'd have the courage to do the right thing," he confessed to Victoria. "You taught me it's never too late to find our dignity." Patricia Weston and Vivian Chambers reached out in the weeks following the scandal, but Victoria kept them at arm's length. "You laughed when you thought I was beneath you," she told them. "Now, you want my friendship because I'm richer? Then that says everything." Victoria's story went viral worldwide. She received invitations to speak at universities about leadership and justice, but she preferred to focus on real change. "I don't want to be famous for suffering," she explained in a rare interview. "I want to be known for what I built." Afterward, the company now funded scholarships for employees' children, launched a microcredit program for underserved entrepreneurs, and established California's largest domestic violence support fund. One quiet afternoon, Victoria received a letter from prison. It was from Richard. "Victoria, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know you taught me that I became a monster. I spend every day trying to understand how I turned into someone capable of killing his own father for money. The children asked about you on their last visit. They want to meet the aunt who protected the family when their father failed." Victoria folded the letter and placed it in a drawer without replying. Forgiveness was a personal journey, but justice had already been served. During the Forbes interview, a journalist asked, "Some say your revenge was too cruel. What do you say to that?" "Revenge would have been doing to him what he did to me," Victoria said calmly. "Justice is ensuring he pays for his crimes and making sure no one else has to suffer what I did. There's a difference. And what advice would you give to others facing injustice?" Victoria looked out the window. Employees were laughing, enjoying lunch in the company garden space that now offered them respect and dignity. "The best revenge," she said, "isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's building something so strong and beautiful that the injustice becomes only the first chapter in a story of triumph." That night, Victoria returned home, not to the small apartment where she once dreamed of justice, but to a warm house, where she'd adopted 2 orphaned girls' children like her, who needed a second chance. As she helped them with homework, she thought of the father she never truly knew. But she knew this: Henry Blackwood would be proud. His daughter hadn't just reclaimed what was stolen, she had transformed a corrupt empire into a beacon of dignity and opportunity. Victoria's real victory wasn't toppling Richard, it was proving that power based on justice is far stronger than power based on fear. Richard tried to humiliate a cleaning lady, and instead discovered he had underestimated a queen. And more importantly, he discovered that dignity cannot be bought, inherited, or stolen. It is earned through the choices we make when no one is watching.